Welcome to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Tonight we're heading deep into Appalachia, into places where the mountains crowd the sky, where the roads narrow without warning, and where the woods seem to listen when you speak too loudly. Across these hills, people whisper about something that isn't quite a legend and isn't quite an animal. Something that walks upright, something that watches from the tree lines, something locals don't like to use by name. They call it Dogman. Not a campfire monster, not a creature you chase, but something encountered by hunters, hikers, truck drivers, and families who swear they saw it standing where no animal should. Silent, intelligent, and far too close. In Appalachia, Dogman stories don't come with neat endings. They come with gaps, with fear, with the same warning repeated again and again. Don't talk about it, and don't go looking. Tonight we're exploring the history, the behavior patterns, and the chilling reasons why Dogman sightings cluster so heavily in these mountains, and why so many witnesses choose silence afterwards. So lower your voice, keep your eyes on the tree line, and whatever you do, don't whistle back if something answers you from the dark. Let's begin. The first thing people notice isn't the sound, it's the smell. Wet fur, rotting leaves, iron, like blood soaked into the soil. A smell that doesn't belong in the mountains, but somehow always does. Appalachia has always been a place where things survive longer than they should. Old traditions, old grudges, old things that, never quite left. People talk about bears, they talk about coyotes, they talk about mountain lions that don't exist anymore. But when someone comes down from the woods, pale and shaking, when they refuse to go back on a trail they've walked their whole life, they don't say any of those names. They say Dogman. Not like a joke, not like a legend, like a warning. Most sightings happen at the edge of things, the edge of tree lines, the edge of campsites, the edge of where pavement ends and dirt roads take over. Hunters say they noticed it first because the woods go quiet, but not empty, as if everything is holding its breath. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just the feeling that something tall is standing where it shouldn't be. 7 feet, broad shoulders, long arms that hang too low, legs bent the wrong way when it moves, fast, silent, intentional. And eyes. People always mention the eyes. Amber, yellow, sometimes even red. Too focused, too aware. Not the eyes of an animal surprised to see you. The eyes of something that already knew you were there. Some say it walks upright. Others swear it drops to all four when it runs, covering ground faster than anything should be able to. It doesn't charge right away. That's the part that stays with people. It watches. From behind trees, from ridge lines, from the dark just past where the flashlight reaches. And then there's the sound. A growl, but wrong. Too deep, too controlled. Not a warning, a message. Leave. In Appalachia, stories like this don't get shared loudly. They're told on porches, in hunting camps, in low voices after someone checks that the doors are locked. Grandparents tell kids not to whistle at night, not to follow sounds calling their name from the woods, not to walk home alone when the moon is full. Because Dogman sightings spike during full moons, during storms, during times when the mountains feel awake. Some witnesses report scratches on trees 8 feet high. Others find tracks that look like oversized wolf prints, until they notice the heel. Then there are the disappearances. Hikers who step off trail and are never found. Hunters whose gear is discovered nearly stacked as if somebody placed it there on purpose. Dogs that refuse to go into the woods ever again after one night. When people try to report what they saw, they're laughed at, dismissed, told it was stress, fatigue, a bear standing up. But bears don't follow you for miles without making a sound. Bears don't circle campsites just outside the firelight. Bears don't feel deliberate. Whatever Dogman is, it isn't new. Some believe it's tied to ancient land spirits. Others say it's a government experiment gone wrong. Some whisper it's something native tribes warned about long before settlers ever arrived. A guardian, a predator, a punishment for trespassing where humans don't belong. Maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe Appalachia never stopped being wild. Maybe something adapted to us instead of the other way around. And maybe when the woods go silent tonight, when you feel watched, even inside your own home, it's because something out there is listening too. Because in Appalachia, you're never really alone. History of Dogman in Appalachia. Long before the word Dogman ever existed, the mountains already had a name for things that walked wrong. Appalachia is older than bones. The mountain range itself predates the dinosaurs. Worn down and reshaped so many times that it feels less like land and more like memory. And people have been telling stories here for as long as people have been brave or desperate enough to live among these hills. Indigenous tribes who live throughout the Appalachian region, the Cherokee, Shawnee, Powhatan, and others, did not describe Dogman as a single creature, but as a type of being, a boundary walker, something that existed only between worlds. Not fully animal, not fully human. Among the Cherokee, there are warnings of beings that could take the shape of wolves or dogs that stand upright, often tied to spiritual imbalance or taboo acts. These weren't campfire monsters. They were consequences. Punishments for breaking natural law, for disrespecting the land, for taking more than what was given. In some stories, these beings were once human. In others, they were never human at all, only wearing the shape as a mockery. What's important is this: they were not hunted, they were avoided. The mountains taught early inhabitants that some things were meant to be left alone. When European settlers arrived in Appalachia in the 1600s and 1700s, they brought their own legends with them. Werewolves from German and Eastern European folklore, black dogs from British ghost stories, and hellhounds said to guard cursed land or follow death itself. And in Appalachia, those stories didn't replace what was already there. They merged. Settlers began reporting encounters that didn't fit neatly into any category. Wolves larger than any they'd seen before, creatures walking on two legs at the edge of the torchlight, shapes pacing cabins at night just beyond the reach of the windows. Journals from frontier families mention livestock found torn apart but not eaten, fences smashed, doors scratched from the outside, and always the same detail. Whatever it was stood upright. By the early 1800s, as Appalachian communities became more isolated, the stories became more consistent. This wasn't something wandering in from somewhere else. It lived here. Coal mining towns in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Pennsylvania added another layer to the legend. Miners working night shifts spoke of something pacing them along ridgelines as they walked home. Something tall enough to be seen above brush, even at a distance. In some towns, men refused to work certain shafts after dark, not because of cave-ins or gas, but because of the sounds echoing through the hills. Low growls that didn't behave like echoes, footsteps that stopped when they stopped. The phrase "the wolf thing" appears in oral histories from the late 1800s, often spoke indirectly, as if naming it too clearly might invite it closer. Then came the 20th century. Dogman didn't fade out with electricity or paved roads. It adapted. During the Great Depression, reports increased. not in newspapers, but in letters, diaries, and family stories passed down quietly. Desperate people moved deeper into the mountains, living off the land, pushing into places that hadn't been disturbed in generations. And something pushed back. By the 1930s and 40s, hunters across Appalachia were reporting encounters that sound eerily modern. Creatures watching from the tree lines, heavy breathing outside deer blinds, a sense of being tracked, not hunted, but measured. World War II brought more logging, more roads, more noise. And still, the stories continued. In the 1960s and 70s, Dogman sightings began appearing in police reports, not labeled as such, but described as unknown large animals or upright canines. Officers responding to calls would find footprints too large for dogs, but shaped nothing like bears. Some refused to write reports at all, because what do you say you saw when it looks back at you? The term Dogman itself didn't become common until the late 20th century, popularized by cryptid researchers and radio shows. But the creature it described had already been living in Appalachian folklore for centuries under different names. The thing on the ridge, the upright wolf, the watcher. Unlike Bigfoot, Dogman was rarely described as curious or passive. Historical accounts painted as territorial, intelligent, uninterested in being seen unless it wanted to be. That detail still has not changed. Modern researchers believe Appalachia's geography plays a role in why Dogman lore is so persistent. Dense forests, steep terrain, vast stretches of land where sound travels strangely and sightlines are limited. Perfect conditions for something that does not want to be found. Or doesn't need to be. Then there's the cultural silence. In Appalachia, survival often depended on not drawing attention, not inviting ridicule, and not speaking about things you couldn't prove. So Dogman stories stayed within families, passed from grandparent to child, from hunter to hunter, from neighbor to neighbor, always with the same warning. If you see it, don't follow it, don't chase it, and don't tell outsiders where. Because according to the oldest stories, Dogman doesn't leave the mountains. The mountains belong to it. And anyone who forgets that doesn't always make it back. History tells us Dogman has always been here, but behavior tells us something far more unsettling. Because whatever this thing is, it hasn't stopped learning. Dogman behavior is consistent enough that researchers stopped asking if it exists and started asking why it behaves the way it does. Across Appalachia, encounters follow the same sequence, even when the witnesses don't know the story. The first sign is environmental suppression. The woods don't just quiet down, they shut off. Crickets stop mid-call, frogs fall silent, birds disappear. Hunters describe it as a pressure change, not in the air, but in awareness. This isn't a natural stillness. It's the response of prey. Animals in Appalachia have learned when to freeze. The second behavior is prepositioning. Dogman is rarely seen approaching. It's already there. Witnesses spot it partway behind trees, standing on ridgelines, or positioned where trails narrow. It uses elevation, coverage, and wind direction intelligently, often remaining downwind. That alone separates it from known predators. This isn't instinct, it's strategy. Dogmen also demonstrate partial exposure. It doesn't reveal its full body immediately. Witnesses report glimpses, an arm, a shoulder, a head peeking past bark thicker than a person's torso. Almost as if it's gauging reaction. Heart rate, movement, fear. Then comes auditory dominance. Low growls that vibrate through the chest instead of echoing. Heavy footfalls meant to be heard. Trees snapping at human shoulder height. These aren't attacks. They're announcements. I'm here, I'm larger, I'm in control. Scratches found later, deep gouges high on trunk trees, serve the same purpose. Not random, not feeding behavior, territorial signage. Dogman's posture matters. When it stands upright, witnesses describe an unnatural stillness. No sway, no wasted movement. Long arms swaying low, knees bent backwards slightly, head tilted forward as if aligning its eyes with yours. This isn't curiosity. It's assessment. Another key behavior is mirroring. Dogman matches movement without revealing itself. If you stop, it stops. If you move, it follows, keeping the same distance, often pacing from higher ground. Hikers describe the sensation of being followed by something they never actually see, and yet they're certain. This is especially common near dusk, when light conditions make depth perception unreliable. Dogman knows when visibility favors it. Canines, domestic dogs especially, react violently to this behavior, growling into the darkness, refusing to move, pulling toward vehicles or structures. Some dogs attempt to flee entirely. Afterward, behavioral changes persist. Dogs that once roam freely refuse wooded areas. Some become aggressive at night. Others shut down. Animals recognize predators we don't. Dogman also exhibits technology interference. Flashlights dim, batteries drain, cameras glitch and refuse to focus. Audio recordings distort during encounters. Whether this is environmental coincidence or something else is debated, but the pattern is consistent. Clear documentation always never happens, as if Dogman understands being seen is different from being recorded. Then there's boundary behavior. Dogman appears most often at edges, trailheads, property lines, old logging roads, creek crossings. Places humans transition from controlled spaces into wilderness. It doesn't always block passage physically. It makes the idea of continuing feel wrong. Witnesses describe an overwhelming certainty that proceeding would lead them to harm. Those who turn back report the presence fading quickly. Those who don't often encounter escalation, which brings us to the next phase. Most animals flee when noticed. Dogman does something else. It remembers. The most dangerous thing you can do after a Dogman encounter is assume it's over. Dogman escalation doesn't happen immediately. It happens after recognition. Once it identifies you as someone who notices it, or worse, ignored its warnings, the behavior changes. The first sign of escalation is distance reduction. Where it once stayed at the edge of sight, it begins closing the gap. Not rushing, not charging, just closer. Footsteps sound closer than before, breathing is audible. The sense of being watched intensifies to the point of distraction. People report losing track of time, missing trail markers, or feeling disoriented. This isn't panic, it's pressure. The second phase is territorial harassment. Campsites are a common target. Witnesses report circling behavior just beyond firelight, heavy pacing, growls that move location, suggesting deliberate movement rather than a single position. Branches fall onto tents from above, not thrown blindly, but dropped. Weight applied to tent fabric. Fingers or claws pressing against the nylon walls, testing the resistance. This is not predatory behavior. It's psychological warfare. Dogman wants you exhausted, frightened, uncertain. It wants you to leave. Some witnesses hear vocalizations during this phase, not howls, but sounds that almost resemble speech. Rhythmic, measured, never clear enough to form words. The effect is deeply unsettling and often described as worse than silence. Another escalation behavior is route manipulation. People attempting to leave an area report obstacles appearing where they weren't before. Trees blocking trails, paths that feel suddenly unfamiliar, the sensation of being guarded or herded without seeing the source. In several Appalachian accounts, witnesses swear the creature positioned itself ahead of them without being seen moving there, as if it anticipated their decisions. Home proximity is rarer but more disturbing. Those living near deep forests report Dogman appearing repeatedly at property edges, standing at the tree lines, watching from hills, pacing behind structures late at night. It does not break in. It announces presence. Scratches along the outbuildings, deep impressions in soil too large for dogs. Windows fog from the outside at heights no animal should reach. Lights flicker, dogs refuse to go outside after dark, livestock panic for no visible reason. This phase can last for days or years. The final and most feared escalation is direct intimidation. This is when dogmen allow itself to be seen clearly. Witnesses describe full body exposure, upright stance, eye contact that feels intentional and prolonged, no growling, no movement, just certainty. People report an overwhelming sense that they are being evaluated, not as prey, but as a threat, a nuisance, or a trespasser. After this encounter, behavior varies. Some never see it again. Others experience recurring sightings in new locations, as if the creature followed them there, not physically, but geographically. They move. Dogman appears at their new place. Not immediately, eventually. What Dogman does not do is attack without cause. Historical and modern accounts suggest aggression only occurs when warning signs are ignored, territory is repeatedly violated, or witnesses attempt to pursue or document the creature. Even then, attacks are rarely fatal, which raises a far more unsettling question. Why let people live? Many researchers believe dogman escalation is about enforcement, not feeding. It does not need to kill to maintain control. Fear works better. The longer you live with the memory, the more effective the warning becomes. And that may be the most disturbing behavior of all. Dogman doesn't want legends. It wants compliance. Because in Appalachia, the mountains don't belong to us. And whatever enforces the truth has been doing it for a very long time. So why does a dogman show up in Appalachia? If dogman exists anywhere, it makes sense that it would exist here. Appalachia isn't just a place on a map, it's a corridor. A spine of land that stretches from southern New York all the way down to Alabama, crossing more states, cultures, and histories than any other region in the country. And it's old. The Appalachian Mountains are among the oldest mountain ranges on Earth. They were ancient before humans ever learned to write, worn down not by violence, but by time. That kind of age matters, because places that old don't just hold fossils, they hold memory. Appalachia has more unexpected land than most people realize. Vast sections of forest remain largely untouched, not because they're protected, but because they're inaccessible. Steep hollers, dense canopy, land passed down through families who don't welcome outsiders. Perfect conditions for something that doesn't want to be studied or disturbed. The forests here are layered. Visibility is limited. Sound behaves strangely, bending and carrying in ways that confuse direction. Something can move close without being seen, heard without being located. Dogman behavior fit this terrain too well to ignore. Then there's the wildlife. Historically, Appalachia supported wolves, dire wolves, and large apex predators long before settlement. Even after wolves were officially wiped out, reports of large canines never stopped. People didn't imagine the shape. They remembered it. Many dogman sightings occur along old migration routes, ridgelines, river valleys, and game trails that predate roads by thousands of years. The paths haven't changed. Whatever walks them doesn't need maps. Human history adds another layer. Appalachia was settled in isolation. Families lived far apart, relying on each other and the land rather than centralized authority. When something strange happened, there was no reason to report it. You handled it, or you avoided it. That cultural silence allowed stories to survive without becoming spectacle. Dogman wasn't a monster you hunted. It was a presence you respected. Coal mining and logging further shaped the landscape, opening deep cuts into the mountains, exposing places that were never meant to be exposed. Mines collapsed, tunnels flooded, entire communities vanished almost overnight. And still, Dogman reports cluster around abandoned infrastructure. Old mine entrances, forgotten rail lines, decommissioned logging roads. Places where humans left, but something else remained. Appalachia also sits at the crossroads of belief systems. Indigenous spiritual warnings, European folklore, Appalachian superstition, Christian demonology, all layered together without replacing one another. Dogman exists comfortably in that overlap. Not a demon, not an animal, not a ghost. Something older, something territorial. The region's poverty plays a role too, not as a cause, but as a cover. When people hear report strange encounters, they're dismissed quickly, labeled uneducated, superstitious, or unreliable. That dismissal keeps things quiet. Dogman doesn't trend, it lingers. Weather patterns matter as well. Appalachia experiences sudden storms, dense fog, heavy rainfall, and unpredictable temperature shifts. Visibility drops fast, and sound travels poorly. Dogman sightings spike during storms and full moons, times when movement can be concealed and scent trails disrupted. This suggests timing, intelligence, and finally, there's the human factor. In Appalachia, you grow up learning boundaries. Not every trail is meant to be walked, not every sound is meant to be followed, and not every place welcomes you back. Dogman stories reinforce those lessons. They aren't about fear, they're about respect. Because Appalachia doesn't resist outsiders loudly, it warns them. And Dogman may be one of those warnings. Not a myth created by the mountains, but a response to being crossed. Silence and fear. Silence is the first thing people remember. Not the creature, not the eyes, not even the fear. The silence. In Appalachia, the woods are never truly quiet. There's always movement. Insects, wind through the leaves, distant animals calling to one another. It's a living soundscape, even at night. So when it stops, your body notices before your mind does. Witnesses describe it as a pressure change, a weight settling over the land. The moment you realize you can hear your own breathing, and that it sounds too loud. This kind of silence isn't natural. It's reactive. Animals go quiet when something larger enters their space. Something that doesn't hunt like the rest. Something that doesn't belong to the usual hierarchy. Fear spreads faster than the sound. And humans feel that too. People report sudden dread with no clear source. Nausea, tightness in the chest, a compulsion to leave immediately. Not panic, not confusion, just certainty. As if something inside them recognized a threat their conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. This fear doesn't spike. It builds. Slowly, relentlessly. Witnesses say it feels like they're being watched from all directions at once. Like the darkness itself is paying attention. Even people who never see Dogman describe being observed. Measured, as if something is deciding what to do with them. Silence becomes part of the intimidation. Every snapped branch feels intentional. Every rustle sounds closer than it should be. Your mind fills the gaps left by the absence of noise. That's when the fear does its best work. Some people report auditory distortions, hearing footsteps that stop when they stop, breathing that isn't their own, or sounds that seem to come from inside their head rather than the woods. This isn't hysteria, it's isolation. Without environmental sound, your brain has nothing to ground itself. You lose scale, distance collapses, everything feels closer. Dogman doesn't need to rush. The silence does the damage. In many encounters, the fear peaks right before visual confirmation, as if the presence wants to be felt before it's seen. When the witness is finally spotted, the fear doesn't explode. It settles, because now the threat has a shape. And it's worse than imagination. People describe a primal understanding in that moment. Not recognition, acceptance. The feeling that they've stepped into a space where they are no longer in control. This fear lingers long after the encounter ends. Months, years, sometimes even decades. People avoid wooded areas, change routines, sleep with the lights on, listen for silence the way others listen for noise, because silence becomes a warning. Some witnesses report that they fear quiet places even indoors, basements, hallways, royal roads at night, spaces where sound doesn't travel well. The mind remembers what the body learned. Silence meant something was close. And the most unsettling part? Silence often returns before repeat encounters. As if Dogman announces itself the same way every single time. Not with sound, but with its absence. In Appalachia, people don't fear the woods because of what they've seen. They fear them because of what they didn't hear. Because when the mountains go quiet, something else is listening. Silence isn't empty, it's occupied. And in Appalachia, it usually means you're not alone. Evidence. When it comes to Dogman, evidence doesn't look the way people expect it to. There are no clear photographs, no bodies, no definitive DNA sample locked in a lab. And that absence is often used as proof that Dogman doesn't exist. But in Appalachia, evidence has never been about what you can carry out of the woods. It's about what's left behind. The most commonly reported physical evidence is tracks. Witnesses describe oversized canine prints with distinctive toes and claw marks, but with something off, a heel impression. Weight distribution that suggests upright movement, stride lengths far longer than any known wolf or dog. In several Appalachian cases, these tracks begin as four-footed impressions, then shift into bipedal steps without a break. No stumble, no confusion, just transition. That detail alone eliminates most known animals. Then there are tree markings. Scratches appear far higher than bears can reach, 8, sometimes 9 feet off the ground. Deep gouges made in parallel sets, often found near trails, campsites, or property borders. These aren't feeding marks. They're deliberate. Researchers believe that these scratches serve as the same function as scent markings or territorial display, but designed to be seen by something taller than a bear, by humans. Another form of evidence comes from environmental reaction. Animals don't lie. Hunters often report deer fleeing areas suddenly and refusing to return, birds abandoning nesting zones overnight, livestock panicking for no visible reason. Dogs, especially, react with intensity, growling at empty tree lines, refusing to move forward, shaking uncontrollably. Some dogs will never enter the woods again after a single encounter. This behavioral shift persists long after the threat is gone. If nothing was there, nothing should have changed. Technology offers mixed results, but that too is evidence in its own way. Cameras fail, batteries drain rapidly, audio recordings distort, thermal imaging captures heat signatures that don't match known wildlife, tall, narrow, fast-moving shapes that disappear abruptly. The problem isn't that there's no footage. It's that what is captured rarely survives scrutiny long enough to be accepted. And that leads to another form of evidence: pattern consistency. Across decades, across states, witnesses describe the same details without knowing each other's stories. Upright posture, long arms, canine head, silent movement, and tense eye contact. They don't agree on theories. They agree on experience. Psychological evidence matters too. Dogman witnesses don't seek attention. Most avoid interviews. Most refuse to speak publicly at all. Some only tell family members, and that's years later. When they do speak, the emotional response is consistent. Fear mixed with certainty. Not hysteria, not excitement, conviction. People don't forget encounters like this. Their lives change around them. Finally, there's negative evidence, the lack of remains, dens, or hunting sites. Some researchers argue this proves Dogman doesn't exist. Others argue it proves something far more unsettling. If Dogman is intelligent, territorial, and avoids detection, then leaving nothing behind is exactly what we'd expect. In Appalachia, the land keeps secrets well, and maybe the strongest evidence of all is people who experience Dogman don't try to convince others. They just don't go back. They change routes, they sell their land, they stop hiking. Because whatever left those tracks, whatever made those woods go silent, left enough evidence to convince them. And for those who saw it, that was more than enough. Evidence doesn't always prove what something is. Sometimes it only proves what it isn't. By the time people leave Appalachia, they rarely leave empty-handed. They take something with them. Sometimes it's just a feeling, a heaviness they can't explain. Other times it's a memory that doesn't fade the way others do. A moment when the woods went quiet and their body knew something their mind couldn't name yet. Dogman isn't a story that ends neatly. There's no final answer waiting at the edge of the trail. No proof strong enough to settle the argument. And maybe that's because Dogman was never meant to be understood the way we understand animals and myths. It exists in the space between instinct and warning. Everything you've heard tonight, the behavior, the silence, the escalation, the patterns tied to Appalachian itself, points to one uncomfortable truth. This thing doesn't want attention. It wants distance. Dogman appears where boundaries blur, where people wander just a little too far off the familiar path, where land that hasn't been touched in generations still remember how to defend itself. And when it's noticed, it doesn't rush. It watches. Because fear doesn't need violence to work. Sometimes all it takes is the certainty that you're not welcome anymore. For generations, Appalachian families learned to respect that feeling. They didn't need stories to go viral. They didn't need names or headlines. They just knew when to turn back. Those lessons weren't superstition. They were survival. And if you've ever experienced something that you can't explain, a presence in the woods, a silence that felt wrong, eyes watching you from just beyond the tree line, you're not alone. Many people carry these encounters quietly for years. Some never even tell anyone at all. Others only share them once they realize how many similar stories exist. If you've had a Dogman encounter, or any experience from Appalachia that still stays with you, I want to hear it. You don't have to have proof. You don't have to know what it was. You don't even have to use your real name. All stories remain anonymous. Sometimes telling the story isn't about answers. It's about finally setting the weight down. Because whatever lives in these mountains doesn't need belief to exist. It only needs to be remembered. And when the woods go quiet again tonight, when the wood feels a little heavier than it should, listen to that feeling. It's been keeping people alive for a very long time. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.